I'm not here to talk about my personal experiences as an activist in the larger women's rights spaces in Jakarta. A world filled with women far more inspiring, far more interesting, and far more exemplary than myself. I cannot stand here hoisting my feminist colors, pumping my fist up in the air for women's rights without talking about what is much more important in context here. I would be appropriating the work of my forebears, women who have cried and laughed, fought and marched, stood unashamed, unabashed, steadfast, carrying the torches of their forebears in the struggle to be seen and treated as equal. I'm here to talk about what allowed me to stand here in the first place, and I'm here to talk about what allowed all of us to sit and participate in this very room, to skim through a catalog of case studies, experiences, any sort of stimuli, to be inspired to do things that we are all already able to do in the first place, simply for having what we already have. And I'm here to talk about privilege. So, privilege is a hard word to talk about. It's an even harder word still to conceptualize and frame. It's a legal term, a social term, a financial term, and even a computing term. In all manners, it talks about rights, benefits, advantages, immunity, exemption, and time again, opportunity. By now, the Gen Zs and internet crawlers and maybe a few younger millennials have probably heard of the term check your privilege. I'm sure, have you all heard of it? Yeah. It's a simple saying. It forces a simple yet loaded activity in order for someone to understand their rights and privileges, in order for someone to understand the opportunities given to them simply for being them. A reality check for people to remember that sometimes success is more often than not just luck. I would be remiss to say that the term originated in Tumblr, but it was definitely popularized by so-called social justice warriors on the site, or SJWs pejoratively. But if you do Google the term, the first search result would be from knowyourmeme.com, which says all you need to know about how polarizing the concept of privilege can be. So, what is privilege? Or at least the way that we understand it. The first time the concept of social privilege was theorized was by African American sociologist and historian W.E.B. Du Bois. He wrote that white Americans are not conscious of racial discrimination, and they don't know the impact. We fast forward to the 1960s during the civil rights movement, where the term white skin privilege started to be thrown around. And then finally, to hit a home run in the late 80s, feminist and activist Peggy McIntosh finally put into words in an article. She was a student at Wellesley at the time. In the article, she wrote about the everyday experiences of minorities and marginalized peoples, on how it's so systematic that it becomes invisible to those who are in the dominant position. To have any chance of remedying this, she calls out for each individual to be aware of what she calls our unearned advantages and disadvantages. Now, as we sit here and we talk about the concept of privilege, I can't help but to hear the ringing in my ears when we were holding the Women's March. I can hear the counter-protest to the march. I can hear the sexually charged nature of the abuse that we got on Instagram on our personal DMs. And I can already hear the violent language lauded at us to drive home the point of one simple message, that feminism is a Western concept. bukan budaya timur, budaya barat. It's westernized, it's whitewashed, it's Eurocentric, it's irrelevant, it's not here. Gak ada hubungannya sama kita, budaya timur. People became so personally charged at our supposed hawking of Western propaganda, and they were so angry that I thought it became projection and distraction to the issues that matter. Issues that are real, issues that are relevant, issues that are both budaya barat and budaya timur. And so the question changes. Are they angry at us for being whitewashed? Or are they angry at us for being women with a voice? But perhaps our critics are not entirely misplaced. After all, the feminist movement is dominated by white women. And when it comes to championing issues outside of their space, they have a tendency to overgeneralize. They have a tendency to paint a picture of all of us, women of color and minorities, as something that is easily understood and easily framed. Third world women, they call us third world women. Women who sit outside of the fences of the Western and First World sphere. Unfortunately for them, our experiences are far too unique and far too important to dismiss just to rally the women of the world in order to create a global sisterhood. To treat various people with various socioeconomic backgrounds, unique cultural heritage, and unique experiences as a sort of attractive catch-all term is not only problematic, but downright irresponsible. Othering people is comfortable. Othering people is easy. It's simple, it's manageable, it's quick. After all, to treat everyone else as the collective other is a sort of well-celebrated method in the history of oppression. Just take any history book, open it to any page, and you'll find it. So maybe our critics are not so much wrong as they are misunderstood. Their arguments are understandable, but nevertheless still misdirected. Because rights of women are not a Western construct. It just simply is. How we fight it is perhaps what makes them uncomfortable. When we respond to this, we can all say all of those words: Eurocentrism, whitewash, Western-centered, neo-imperialism, post-colonialism, and my personal favorite, Orientalism. So, when we first held the Women's March in 2017, we also asked ourselves, how do we define ourselves in the larger context of women's rights activism? When we first held it, every woman in the world stood in solidarity with our sisters in the United States following Trump's election in 2016. And we all stood with them. And it inspired activists in Indonesia to do the same. We wanted to stand with them. But then we thought, is it relevant to us? Are the causes that the women in Washington bringing relevant to us? Is it the same as ours? Do women in Indonesia even understand what feminism is? And if they don't, is it because of their background? And if it is it classist then? And most importantly, are we doing it as sort of one token celebration, or can it be a platform for something bigger? All these doubts and questions and realizations finally brought into a very obvious thing, that you can't blueprint activism. Everything is contextual. So let's return to the issue of privilege. Now, privilege, just like activism, is subject to the local experience. And just like women's right, privilege is not a Western construct. It just simply is. So definitions of privilege is subject to local experiences. So what we have to ask is, Even though the concepts that is outlined by Dubois and McIntosh may not be wholly relatable, we can definitely start it as a starting point to create our own list. So I've set up a questionnaire here that you can all ask yourselves and reflect on. Things that are completely simple. Do you go to private school? Do you holiday more than once a year? Can you buy a new phone just because you want it to? Is going to uni abroad totally a given? Do you have a driver? Do you wash your own clothes? Do you make your own bed? Do you think twice about dining out? Do you speak English proficiently? And if you do you speak it with your parents? And if you answer yes to any of this, then congratulations, you are privileged, and you need to keep reminding yourself about it. So now that we've talked about privilege and activism as separate beings, let's bring it home together. After all, we go into another place, a larger discussion about spaces, occupying spaces, and whether or not us as privileged people has the privilege to be in those spaces. After all, are we not fighting against the very system that allowed us to be privileged, to live a comfortable life? Can we as privileged people understand what is being fought for? And terrifyingly, are we doing this just to make ourselves feel better? Are we just playing savior? After all, I, a privileged person, calling myself an activist is akin to a multinational company and their CSR program, to offset their guilt, to offset their everyday destructive being. So even amongst Women's March organizers and the larger Jakarta feminist group, we still ask these questions. We are urban, we're mostly middle and upper class, we speak English, we're university educated, and we are quite traveled. So who are we? What right do we have to speak for all the women in Indonesia who majority do not have these privileges? And these are questions that we continue to ask ourselves, and we will never stop asking ourselves because it is a part of our activism. So what I want to say is we cannot occupy spaces that someone less privileged than you have already occupied. And now that we've already checked our privilege, what now? So what? We have to be aware, and it's important to realize that those privileges can be used for something more other than feelings of self-guilt. Because we have a tendency to do this. We risk preoccupation with this. We risk the feelings of using activism as a way to atone our privileges. We risk preoccupied with the thoughts that I have had it so good. What can I do to make myself feel better to having had it so good? So then, we return again to the issue about genuine activism and why we do it. And then we talk about being an ally, not a shepherd. Because us being in a privileged position, me, myself, it would be negligent of me to put myself amongst the ranks of these women who have trudged on, fighting for women's rights day in and day out, tirelessly advocating and championing women's rights, while my privilege has gotten me this far with far too much ease. So how do I support them as a privileged person? I want to be able to support them without appropriating their work. I want to be able to appreciate them without feeling like I know better because I'm educated or something. So we need to be an ally. We don't need to be a shepherd. We can't play savior. And even though treating it like this is something that is kind of usual, and perhaps people practicing it is well-intentioned in nature. Take the Western feminists that I was talking about, who wanted to rally everyone and sympathize with women around the globe. take the university gap year student who go to a remote place to teach English, or about any advertisement that you see of a malnourished African children needing for 60 cents. They're there, this is us, that's them, this is us. And so how do we remedy this? How can I, as a person, a privileged person, understand what is being fought for? And the only way that we can do this is to use our privilege in a way to become a support system for them. So, seriously, it's really not about you. It's about the people who fight day in and day out. It's not about us feeling better about ourselves. You need to be genuine and don't be pressured, and you need to be genuine about your activism. Whatever cause we choose, we need to be genuine. Because my privilege has gotten me this far. And I have to remind myself that it is my privilege that allowed me to be amongst these women easily. And I have to keep reminding myself of that every day. And what do I do to understand my ease? I can use that ease, and I can share that ease, and craft it to become a support system for whatever cause we choose. Because at the end of the day, we have rendered the right null and void the moment we checked our privilege. Thank you.